So, guys, welcome. As you know, today our session will be configuring Hyper-V. So, we are going to learn about how to configure Hyper-V in this slide. So, let's start. This is all about me. You can go to my Facebook page, my blog for latest articles. You can email me or you can WhatsApp me anytime as your requirement. So let's begin with the first slide, and it is Hyper-V in Windows Server 2012. Windows Server 2012 includes the Hyper-V role, which enable administrator to create virtual machines. So in Windows Server 2012, if you want to enable the Hyper-V role, you can create virtual machines or virtual system, virtual guests on that particular host machine, each of which run its own isolated environment. So the benefit will be, whenever you created virtual machine, that virtual machine will run on its own environment. VM are self-contained unit that administrator can easily move from one physical computer to another. So why VM? Because VM are user-friendly while moving from one place to another place. Gradually it simplifies the process of deploying network application and services. So it will give us a benefit while deploying any network services or applications. This chapter covers some of the fundamental tasks about administrator to perform, create and deploy Hyper-V server and VMs. So in this session, we are going to learn about administrator platform, how to create, deploy Hyper-V servers and its VM, virtual machines. So in the first topic, let's discuss about create and configure virtual machine settings. So in this slide, server virtualization in Windows Server 2012 is based on a module called Hypervisor. So before you start creating any virtual machine, the server virtualization in Windows Server 2012 basically based on the module called Hypervisor, sometimes called a virtual machine monitor, VVM. The hypervisor is responsible for abstracting the computer's physical hardware and creating multiple virtualized hardware environments. This is actually called VMs. Each VM has its own virtual hardware configuration and can run separate copy of operating system. That means if you have a host system with Windows Server 2012 and you have installed a guest machine with Windows XP or Windows Server 2003, 2008, it is possible and it can be run with a different OS, different hardware, virtual hardware and everything. Therefore, with significant physical hardware and the correct licensing, a single computer running with Windows Server 2012 with the Hyper-V role installed can support multiple virtual machines, which administrator can manage as if they were standalone computers. So these are the benefits. So why we are going to create VMs, guys? So the basic needs is, suppose you have a huge configuration of server, like you have 256 gig RAM, or you have 4 or 5 TB hard disk on RAID. So in that case, if you going to share the hard disk resources, hardware resources, and create another virtual machine, it is possible if you have correct licensing and virtual system. Hypervisor is installed on your machine, on your server machine. So if you have Windows Server 2012 along with Hypervisor enabled and you have installed Hyper-V role on it, you can easily manage the VM guest. So this is the virtualization architecture. Virtualization product can use several different architecture to share a computer's hardware resource among the VMs. The earlier type of virtualization products, including Microsoft Windows Virtual PC and Microsoft Virtual Server, required a standalone OS installed on a computer. This becomes the host OS. So before we create any hypervisor, we should have a proper hardware first. Then we need a host operating system. Then you can install virtualization product, which is HyperV in the Microsoft operating system, which adds the hypervisor component. So the HyperV, while installing HyperV Role, what you are doing, you are actually enabling the hypervisor component on the machine, on the server. The hypervisor essentially run outside of the host OS. So this is basically a single operating system which runs as a services, hypervisor as a services. So as shown is this argument on the right hand side, if you can see here on the downstairs, we have mentioned this is the hardware part, and under this hardware we have installed host operating system. And once we install the HyperV Role, it will give us a new feature, that is virtualization product, which is known as hypervisor component. So this is basically enabled hypervisor component. Once the hypervisor component is enabled, then you can create multiple virtual machines based on the resources available at your host machine, host computer. Type 2 hypervisor. So this is important, guys. You already heard about the hypervisor and all, but what about type 2 hypervisor? Let's learn about that. The hypervisor runs on top of the host operating system. It is called type 2 virtualization. So why it is called type 2 virtualization? Because a core operating system is required before creating any virtualized environment. By using the type 2 hypervisor, you can create virtual hardware environment for each VM. You can specify how much memory to allocate each VM, create virtual disk drive by using separate on computer physical drives, and provide access to the particular devices. You then install a guest operating system on the VM, just as if you were deploying a new computer. So guest-based deployment is just like that, you are installing a new operating system on a computer. The host OS then shares across the computer processor with hypervisor. So it is basically share the hardware resources with the guest operating system. With each taking the clock cycle, it needs a passing control of the processor back to the other. So this is the entire thing. It will help because the clock cycle, it needs processing the control of the processor back to the other. So this is why the guest operating system creates an individual infrastructure or individual hardware virtual hardware configuration. The type 2 virtualization can provide adequate VM performance, particularly in classroom and laboratory environment, but it does not provide performance equivalent to separate physical computer. So this is one of the important keynotes, that whenever you create VMware, that is virtual machines on type 2 hypervisor, the VM performance, particularly on the classroom and laboratory environment, it is okay. But in production environment, it is different from a physical computer, separate physical computer. If you have, suppose, if you have 10 gig RAM on a physical machine and you are using that physical machine for a particular role or services, then it will occupy 100% of the 10 gig memory. But if you enable that particular machine on a hypervisor, so you have to set a memory like 10 gig or others. If the host operating system do not have 10 gig free memory on it, so how they can provide? So this is the basic keynotes you have to follow while deploying any type to virtualization. Therefore, it is not gradually recommended for high traffic server in production environment. So this is why the hypervisor guest operating system requires dedicated memory, dedicated RAM, and dedicated hardware resources to perform better than the hardware, physical hardware computer. So now learn about the type 1 virtualization. We have learned about the type 2, and what is type 1 virtualization? HyperV use type 1 virtualization. So whenever you install the HyperV, it enables the type 1 virtualization, in which the hypervisor is an abstraction layer that integrates directly to the computer physical hardware. So after installing HyperV, it will convert the virtualization in type 1, and it is having the ability to directly contact with the physical hardware. That is, without an intervening of host operating system. The term hypervisor is intended to represent the level beyond term supervisor. So in regards to the responsibility for allocating a computer processor clock cycle. So this is the basic benefit, guys. So if you enable the HyperV role, it will convert the virtualization platform in type 1. So in type 1, the benefit is it will not interact with the host operating system, because it will directly communicate with the processor, memory, and other hardware resources on the physical server. The hypervisor creates individual environments called partitions. Each of has its own OS installed and across the computer hardware via hypervisor. So in type 1, each and every guest operating system will create on its own OS environment with own hardware configuration. Unlike type 2 virtualization, no host operating system shares the processor type with hypervisor. So host operating system will no longer in place to control or affect the VM guest. Instead, the hypervisor designates the first partition to create as a parent partition and all subordinate partition as a child partition. So this is the benefit, guys. If we are using HyperV, Microsoft HyperV, it is a type 1 hypervisor. First thing is that, and the benefit of the type 1 hypervisor is it will not interact with the host operating system, because it will directly communicate with the server physical hardware, and it will get the information or consume the hardware as on the required as per the configuration done by you. HyperV implementations. So this is also important, guys, because when you are planning for the virtualization in any environment, you first have to understand about the implementation phase, how you can implement. Okay, so I think I got some question. Just be online. Kindly repeat again Hypervisor 1 version 1. Okay, great. So on request, let me go back to the previous slide. I think we have a doubt on type 1 virtualization. So type 1 virtualization is a virtualization type. There is two type of virtualization. First thing is type 1 and type 2. Okay. Basically, in modern system, when we are installing a host operating system, like if we have a physical hardware server, where you install Windows Server 2012 as a host operating system, and on that you install virtual machines, and you install a guest operating system like Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 8, and all. This is basically called a type 2 virtualization, because in type 2 virtualization, it's always depend on the host operating system. Host operating system will share the CPU clocks with the type 2 virtualization system. So it will impact the performance. But it is okay for lab environment. While you are doing any testing or all, this is okay for that. But when we discuss about the type 1 virtualization, what is type 1 virtualization? This is specifically a feature of Windows when you are going to enable the HyperV role on any server. That means a physical server, you have installed Windows Server 2012 and you have enabled the HyperV role. Once you enable the HyperV role, the virtualization will convert it to a type 1 virtualization. Why? How it is converted? Because the HyperV role itself enables the hypervisor with type 1 facility. So type 1 facilities is, what is the type 1 facilities? Type 1 facility will help guest operating system to run on its own individual environment and control the server physical resources directly without intervening the host operating system. Suppose you have 12 gig RAM on a physical server and you have created a virtual machine with 8 gig RAM. So when you are applying 8 gig RAM on virtual machine, it will consume the 8 gig from the logical memory of, that means RAM, and it will dedicatedly use for the virtual machine. And this type 1 virtualization basically used in production environment for heavy duty servers who are require much bandwidth. And why we are going to do virtualization instead of physical hardware? The only benefit is virtualization is very much portable. You can easily migrate or move any server from one system to another system. You can add or delete server resources as on required. Deployment of operating system is very much quick. So these are the basic benefits why you are going to learn about the virtualization, why you need virtualization. And type 1 give you a full feature of virtualization where each and every guest creates its own hardware configuration, which is known as partition. So the first partition, that means the configuration partition and the operating system, whatever the information have, like in a guest operating system, you have installed Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2 with 2 gig RAM, 30 gig hard disk, 1 DVD drive, 1 floppy drive, and all. So this is the configuration, and you have configured the MBR partition table and all. So these are the configuration which is stored in a partition. So the first partition is known as parent partition, and the rest of all partition is known as child partition in hypervisor. So this is the benefit, and type 1 have the ability to directly contact with the physical hardware resources without intervening the host operating system. This is the another main benefit why you are going to use type 1 hypervisor. Next, learn about the HyperV implementations. Windows Server 2012 includes the HyperV role only in the standard and data center edition. So before you plan for the HyperV installation, you should also know that Hyper-V is only available with editions. One is standard and another is data center edition. The Hyper-V role is required for the OS to function as a computer primary partition. So this is the basic thing why Hyper-V role is required. Without Hyper-V, your system will be type 2 hypervisor. And whenever you install Hyper-V role, it will convert it to type 1 hypervisor. In type 1, it's required OS to function as a computer primary partition. Enable it to host other VMs. No special software is required for an OS to function as a guest OS in a VM. So, in Hyper-V, if you want to run a VM, virtual machine, we do not need any other third party or other applications to function it properly. Therefore, although Windows Server 2012 Essential does not include Hyper-V role, so if you are going to plan for a go with Windows Server Essential, do not go with that, because Windows Server 2012 Essential does not include with Hyper-V role. It can function as a guest operating system. Other guest operating system support by Hyper-V include the current workstation OS and many other non-Microsoft server and workstation products. So before implementing, you should understand what are the version supports Hyper-V role. So basically the gist of this slide is, whenever you are planning for deployment of Hyper-V role in any environment, if you are in Windows Server 2012 or 2012 R2, the only operating system who are supported, that is standard and data center edition. So if you use standard and data center, you can enable the Hyper-V role anytime as on required, and you can create a type 1 hypervisor in the environment. In type 1 hypervisor, you can create guest operating system as a partition. The first partition will be primary partition and the other will be child partition. One more thing you need to know, Hyper-V licensing. As far Hyper-V is concerned, the primary difference between the standard and data center edition of Windows Server 2012 is the number of VMs that they support. Okay? So whenever you are installing Hyper-V, you should know how many server editions, guest VMs it can support. When you install a Windows Server 2012 instance in a VM, you must have licensing for it. This is the first thing. So it is a licensed product. You have to purchase licensed standard edition or licensed data center edition. Just like when you install it on a physical machine, purchasing the data center edition license, you to create an unlimited number of VMs running on Windows Server 2012. So what it is mean? If you have a physical server and you have purchased a Windows Server 2012 data center edition and you enable the Hyper-V on it and you start creating the virtual machines on Windows Server 2012, you can create unlimited number of VMs. There is no licensing, no cost, no additional cost. Basically, Hyper-V is a role, and role are basically installed on a server. So server licensing is the mainly required here. Differently, Hyper-V is a free role which can be installed in standard and data center edition. If you install data center edition, you can create unlimited number of virtual machine in Windows Server 2012. The guest operating system will have to be Windows Server 2012. And if you are using standard licensing product, you only have 2 virtual instances on Windows Server 2012. So if you are installing Windows Server Standard Windows Server 2012 standard on a physical machine and you have enabled Hyper-V, you can create maximum 2 free instances of Windows Server 2012 on it. If you want to create more, what is the requirement? You have to create another additional license for operating systems. Hope this is clear, guys. Let's move to the next slide. This is about the hardware limitations. The Windows Server 2012 version of Hyper-V contains massive improvements in the stability of the system over previous versions. A Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V host system can have up to 320 logical processors, support up to 2048 virtual CPUs, and up to 4 terabytes of physical memory. One server can host as many as 1024 active VMs, and each VM can have up to 64 virtual CPUs and up to 1 TB of memory. Hyper-V can also support cluster with up to 46 nodes and 8,000 VMs. So these are the limitations. Guys, if you are using Windows Server 2012, the limitation is very high, and Microsoft have done much more improvement than 2008 and 2008 R2. In 2012, as you can see, we can create, it supports 320 number of logical processors. It supports 20848 virtual CPUs. It supports up to 4 terabyte of physical memory. One server can host 1024 active VMs, and each VM can have 64 virtual CPUs and up to 1 terabyte of memory. And Hyper-V also supports cluster up to 64 nodes and 8,000 VMs as well. Now let's learn about the installing Hyper-V. Once you have appropriate hardware and the required license, you can add Hyper-V Role to Windows Server 2012 by using the Server Manager, just as you would any other role. So this is basically mean, if you have the proper operating system license like data center and standard, you can go to the Server Manager and enable or install the Hyper-V Role as on required. It is just similar like other role installation. Microsoft recommends that you do not install other roles with Hyper-V. That means if you want to use Hyper-V on a machine, do not use the machine for other purpose like file server, DHCP, AD server, or any other else. It is better to implement only other roles that you need a physical computer or physical platform to within one of the VMs created by the Hyper-V. So if you have any requirement of any other role installation on Hyper-V, so do not install it on the host operating system, install it on the virtual machines. Before you can install the Hyper-V Role on a server running with Windows Server 2012, you must have appropriate hardware as follows. So before installing the Hyper-V Role, you should have below hardware spec: 64-bit processor that include hardware associated with virtualization. So your processor should support virtualization, that means HP. This is available in processor that includes a virtualization option such as Intel virtualization technology, which is known as Intel VT, and AMD virtualization, which is known as AMD-V technology. That should be enabled on your processor. and processor should be 64-bit supported processor. A system BIOS that supports the virtualization hardware on which the virtualization feature had been enabled. So your BIOS should support the virtualization. Hardware enforced data execution prevention, or DEP, which Intel declared as a executed disable XD, and AMD described as no execute NX. This is a technology used in CPU to segregate areas of memories and other storage of processor instructions for the storage. Specifically, you must enable the Intel XD bit, execute disable bit, or the AMD NX bit, no execute bit. So these are the hardware feature actually, guys. These are the technical term of the feature. So before you install, you should remember this: your processor should have 64-bit support along with Intel VT or AMD V supported. Your BIOS should support the virtualization, because when you are go to any BIOS setting in advanced tab, you can find a virtualization enabled or disabled option. And the next is hardware informants and other technology to share processors, the NX DEP, and for Intel it is XD, and for AMD it is NX. That should be enabled on your board, motherboard. These are the installation process, guys. Why we have specified the command line? Because if you want to install HyperV on a core machine, Windows Server Core Edition, you can use this syntax to install the Windows Server HyperV Role on any core system. So if you go through the slide, the first command syntax will be install Windows feature, name HyperV. Computer name will be the destination computer name, include management tool, and restart. So this will include the management tool, which will help us to get the management information. It will help us to create virtual machines after installing the HyperV Role, because HyperV Role basically enables the virtualization type 1 on your machine, but the tool will help you to manage the virtualization environment. The first thing is how you can install in GUI mode. Log on to the server with running with Windows Server 2012 using an account with administrator privilege. Go to the Server Manager window. Once it is open, from the Server Manager window, go to the Add Roles and Feature option. From Add Roles and Feature wizard, you should click on the Next button, select the Next and select the installation type or the server name. Select the role-based or feature-based installation option and click on the Next option. Then you can find the HyperV Role. You should tick the HyperV Role before installing, and once it is ticked, click on the Next option. And once you click on the Next option, it will appears a new dialog box to install the HyperV Management Tool, which is an additional feature. And it will, you please accept this or add feature option. Click on the add feature, click on the next and finish. It will install the entire HyperV Role along with the management tool on your server, and after installation you will be ready for the configuration of HyperV. Next installation process will be like that. Select the appropriate checkbox once the HyperV ready for the live migrations. If you want to have live migrations, on the right hand side you will get a option of virtual machines and live migrations. Live migration will be required once you have an existing server in Windows virtualization like Windows Server 2008 virtualization. and you have to migrate the virtual machines to a new version of Windows Server virtualization, which is Windows Server 2012, and it will connect using the WMI, and it will copy the entire virtual machine disk to a new environment. So this is the process which is defined on the right hand side. Once you select allow the server to send, receive, then click on the next option. This is the default store page. Specify the alternate default location for the virtual disk or VHD and VM configuration file. If already described, click on the next option to confirm the installation section page appears. Click on the install to move the installation progress wizard to install the role. And once it is wizard showing finished, click on the restart button to restart your server. HyperV Manager looks like something like that. So this is the management tool which will help us to manage the HyperV host. Once the installation of HyperV is completed, you can launch the HyperV Manager console. You can add servers to the display by right-clicking on the HyperV Manager node in the left panel and selecting to the connect to the server from the selection menu. The select computer dialog box appears in which you can type or browse any name of the HyperV servers. If you want to create VM machines using PowerShell, these are the command sets available. So if you want to create a new VM, the commandlet will be new VM, new -VM. So when we are creating a VM, this is the full syntax, new -VM, hyphen put the name of the VM, hyphen memory status byte, that is you have to specify how much memory you want to allocate, space new VHD size bytes, that means you have to specify the VHD, that means disk drive size in bytes. For example, on the downstairs I have created one server with the following information, that is new VM name server A, memory status byte 1 gig and new VHD size with 60 gig, and click on the enter button. It will automatically create a new server with the default location specified in HyperV. The last and important feature that you should know, if you are dealing with Windows Server 2012 HyperV, you should know what are the officially supported operating system available in Windows Server 2012 Hypervisor. So Windows Server 2012 Hypervisor support Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2008, Windows Home Server 2011, Windows Small Business Server 2011, Windows Server 2003 R2, Windows Server 2003 SP2, Windows 8, Windows 7 Enterprise and Ultimate, Windows Vista Business and Enterprise and Ultimate SP2, Windows XP Professional Satisfactory, Windows XP 64-bit Professional SP2, CentOS 6.0 to 6.2, Red Hat Enterprise 6.0 to 6.2, SUSE Linux Enterprise 11 SP2. And Microsoft also give us a note that this is the officially supported guest operating system of RTM. Other OS might also function but have not been fully tested. So if you have any other operating system in the market and you try to install on HyperV, it may be installed but it may not be function properly. So these are the listed operating system which has been tested by Microsoft, and these are the full featured operating system which can be used in Windows Server 2012 HyperV Role. Next is Guest Integration Services. Guys, before you learn about the Guest Integration Services, what is this? It is just like VMware 2. As you know, after installing any guest operating system on VMware, we need to deploy a tool which is known as VMware 2. So that is basically a driver pack. So in HyperV also we have a tool set which is known as guest integration services. In some areas, certain Hyper-V guest features do not function properly using OS own driver. So Hyper-V therefore includes a software package called guest integration services, which you can install on VMs for compatibility purpose. Some of the functions provided by the guest integration service package are as follows. That is operating system shutdown, time synchronization, data exchange, heartbeat, and backup. So if you do not install the guest integration system on guest operating system, what will happen? Sometimes you may face problem while shut down the server because the command will not run. Because why it is not run? Because the driver which is responsible to shut down the server is not properly functioning on the guest operating system. To avoid that, you have to install the guest integration service software in the guest operating system. And guest operating system support operating system shutdown, time synchronization, data exchange, heartbeat, and backup type of function. Hyper-V resource measuring. Resource measuring is a new Windows PowerShell based feature in Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V that enable administrator to document the VM users by a variety of criteria. Resource meeting use Windows Server PowerShell commandlet to track and verify the performance of metrics of individual VM, including the following. That is CPU utilization, minimum, maximum, and average memory utilization, disk space utilization, incoming and outgoing network traffic utilization. Resource metering statistics remain constant even when you transfer VM between host system by using live migration or move VHD between VMs. So this is basically a new feature which is PowerShell feature which is introduced in Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V. And before using that, you should know only it will work once your Hyper-V services is enabled on the server. So if you want to run this resource monitoring in a machine where Hyper-V is not installed, that will not run. To run this command on PowerShell, you should have Windows HyperV Role installed. And with this commandlet, you can track the performance of each and every virtual machine, like CPU, memory, disk, network, everything can be monitored. Now we need to know how to enable the resource meeting in a VM machine, that means guest operating system. To use resource meeting, you must first enable it from the specified VM that you want to monitor by using enable VM resource meeting commandlet with following syntax. So the syntax will be enable VM resource meeting hyphen VM name. You have to put the server name here. Only you have enabled the meeting, you can display the statistical report at any time by using measure VM commandlet. So once it is enabled on a VM machine, and after 2 or 3 days you want to monitor what is the current utilization of the server, don't worry, you have to only use the measure VM commandlet to get the result of the VM metering. VM metering is the new feature. Previously we are used performance checking or performance monitor parts mon in Windows to monitor the Windows performance, but For HyperV, this is the new syntax which is available in PowerShell command lab. So guys, before we go for the practical session, if you have any doubts as of now, please feel free to let us know so that we can give you a proper appropriate answer. Any doubts as of now, please let me know.